Hey, what's up, YouTube? Chat's out of YouTube. Tonight we're going to talk about Masahiro Sakurai. Because, for those of you who don't know, he's moved into my neck of the woods. He's become a YouTuber. They're basically just about, it's little snippets about game dev. But I think Sakurai is a fascinating person to talk about as like a Melee player, content creator, because the Melee community, probably a lot of y'all know, like, didn't always have the highest amount of respect for this dude. Like, in particular, you know, when Brawl came out, there was this huge, you know, kind of uproar where, as someone who went through that, and I should probably, honestly, I should make another video about the Melee versus Brawl feud and that whole dynamic. I'm not going to get too into it because I think it was a really interesting time in the community. In terms of, like, you know, I think we saw a dynamic that probably if you're newer to the community, you just wouldn't really, it was a very different time, let's put it that way. Brawl basically came out, they took out all the advanced techniques, you know, like there was no wave dashing, there was no L canceling, there weren't really combos for a lot of characters because hit stun was so low that usually you just kind of, first of all, you can air dodge out of your hit stun, so you get out of basically every combo for free. You know, the ledge is really strong with a lot of timeouts. And most of all, there was tripping. And I think for a lot of people, tripping felt like this very direct message from the developer that was like, hey, what you guys are doing as a competitive community is wrong and we don't like it, so we're not gonna let you play the way you want to play. And I think that's how a lot of the top players at the time felt. And so it was a very divisive time in the community. And I think as time has gone on, I think we've come to appreciate Sakurai's genius. I think he is an extremely interesting game developer and an extremely, like, you know, at this point I would say pretty much a beloved figure universally, nearly universally. I would say I think people have a lot more, you know, even Melee players like to watch Nintendo Directs and stuff like that, right? Maybe I'm speaking too soon, but I think he's got a lot of good stuff to say. But I do think it's funny as a very old school Melee player, you know, kind of going from where we were in like 2008 to now. It's been an interesting kind of progression with the Melee community's opinion, if you will, on Sakurai and his ideals on game development. Let's bring up some of the articles that I think Sakurai was featured in. This is, I think, the gist of it. There are a couple articles kind of coming. They would be translated from like Japanese interviews or something like that, from Famitsu or something. And they'd basically be about like, oh, what are Sakurai's actual opinions on, for example, Super Smash Bros. Melee and things like that. This particular Kotaku article, an in-depth chat with the genius behind Super Smash Bros. This was the article that I think people were really like up in arms about when this came out. But I remember this part of the interview in particular. Okay, I'm awfully sorry to hear that. To switch gears a little bit, how much do you follow the competitive scene, competitive Smash Bros? There's a big US community. I don't know if there's a community in Japan too, but do you follow that competitive Smash Bros scene? In Japan, there's actually a tournament scene. It's an annual thing, something that just wrapped up actually. It sort of reaches peak, and then now with anticipation for the next title, it's sort of on hiatus. I imagine that will pick up again on release of the new games, but that's something that I'm personally not involved in. It's something that Nintendo manages. Personally, I can't really say too much about that. It's something that Nintendo manages. No, it's not. Do you ever talk to the high-level competitive players when you're balancing Smash Bros? Mostly I don't incorporate feedback like that. Smash Bros is designed to sort of target at the center intermediate players. If you sort of think a skill graph or something targeting just the peak of that performance level, you're targeting a very small group of people. We want to avoid a situation where it becomes a game, sort of like other competitive fighting games, where it's only appreciated by a very small, passionate group of sort of maniac players. And I think this phrase, maniac players, I think it, I will say, I think they kind of did him dirty. When you translate the word mania, because in Japanese you'd say mania, which is like it's kind of like a nice way of saying otaku. It's like a more, like, if you translate it literally, you get the word maniac. But like, if you run it through any good dictionary, the first word that comes up is the word enthusiast, right? Like, when I hear someone in Japanese say mania, like, it's like, it's kind of just like a less insulting way to say nerd. So like enthusiast is the best definition in my eyes, and that's the first one that comes up. So he's basically saying, like, it's like, you know, when we make Smash, we want to make it, we don't want to make it for this small group of enthusiasts. We want to make it for like literally everybody. And then he even goes on to say, like, you know, it's not that I don't appreciate high level play. I mean, you know, the very type of refined competitive gameplay that happens in other fighting games. Personally, I have a lot of experience playing the arcade scene and personally came out as a champion of a 100-person battle in arcade Street Fighter 2. So he's saying he like won a tournament or something. And I think that, like, you know, this kind of got lost on people. Like, I think when this article got translated and came to the West, like, people were really kind of up in arms over the use of particularly this word maniac, and people were really mad at him for that. Okay, if we're being honest, if we're being completely honest, and if you look at like how fighting games besides Street Fighter are received in Japan and globally, Smash is so much bigger. Like, Smash has basically no competitive support, and it's so right, like, everybody played Smash Ultimate. Like, it's so common. It is so common to have a Smash Ultimate setup in your office at a company or something. There's that global kind of mind share where it just comes up in things. And I think that they super duper succeeded at that. Now, I don't know how much of that specific phenomenon, the Smash Bros kind of being as big as it is, I don't know how much of that is the fact that they intentionally tried to steer away from targeting to like competitive gamers. But I will say that they definitely succeeded, right? Like, especially with Smash Ultimate, they definitely reached this. Again, like, I think that he could have probably gotten there keeping things like wave dashing in or whatever. You know, in Ultimate, they even incorporated, you know, there's even like a scuffed version of wave dashing and things like that. Like, there were these little, you know, they added dash dancing. And if you look at all the balance patches they did, you know, they're clearly, they had their eye on the top level of play, right? Like, they were definitely balancing around that. Like, you can see these decisions that they made with their patches that I think, you know, that sort of feedback was certainly incorporated. And, you know, they had people like AMSA, you know, they kind of came around on this. And I think the funny thing is, even though they sort of came around on this viewpoint, I think they had a vision for, and when I say they, I'm kind of saying Sakurai, but also Sakurai and his team. I think they had a vision for the kind of game they wanted to make. And I will say this, I think Smash Ultimate's balance is superb. I think that, like, the fact that they're freaking out as much as they are about the whole Minecraft Steve thing is to me, it's an artifact of the fact that they just never had a #1 character. Like, they literally never had a #1 character on the tier list ever, right? There was never really any agreeing, especially, let alone, like, I think even now, I don't think Japan puts Steve as #1. Smash Ultimate's balance really is extremely good. Like, almost every character is viable at a tournament level. It's pretty ridiculous. Sakurai's viewpoints are also going to evolve over the years. I mean, even in 2014, when Sakurai, like, was at, I briefly met him at the Smash 4 Invitational. Like, that was something we never really thought they would do. And it was a pretty casual rule set, but I do think that even as early as then, they were starting to kind of come around on this sort of thing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think things would have been different if these viewpoints were sort of, when Brawl came out, like, I wish that this happened sooner, and I wish that he incorporated top player feedback going into Brawl, because probably tripping wouldn't have existed. You know, you don't remove, I think the Legends are a great example of them paying attention to top level competitive play, because you would never think to nerf Legend invulnerability as much as they did unless you're actually watching top Brawl matches. So, like, the changes they made to the Ledge from Smash, you know, Brawl to Smash 4 to Ult, like, those are the sorts of changes you're gonna make paying attention to competitive play. And yeah, I mean, I guess I totally understand what he means when he says things like Masahiro Sakurai says Super Smash Bros. Melee was too technical. I think a lot of Melee players love Melee, but at the same time, I think a lot of players on the other gave up on Melee because it's too technical, because they can't keep up with it. And I know there were players who got tendonitis from playing and messing with the controller so much that it really is hard on the player. And I feel like a game should really focus on what the target audience is. I don't think this is that whack to say. I mean, I think that, you know, the common, like, you know, big brain take is like, well, bro, you can design things for the casual audience, but you can include these, like, technical, you know, you can include technical stuff that only high level players are going to do, and you're not really alienating anyone, because most people are just playing with their friends or on their skill level anyway. And this is how Melee was when it came out. Obviously, Melee was a huge game casually as well, and, you know, I would play with my friends on the block, and none of us knew how to wave dash. We vaguely knew that it existed. That being said, I mean, you know, I think as a game developer and as a game designer, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with focusing on your quote-unquote target audience, right? Like, I think that, like, even if you're looking at some modern fighting games that I think are very fun, I think what Sakurai tried to do with probably the later Smash games after Melee was kind of what, you know, Daisuke tried to do with Strive. Obviously, Strive is way the fuck easier than X, or way the fuck easier than Plus R or old school Guilty Gear XX. But, you know, it's fun. There's still ways to outplay people. Obviously, the best people, I would say the best players at Strive are very consistent. You know, people like Umisho, people like Hotashi, you're gonna see those people pretty much every top 8. Like, it's really actually quite it's been interesting for me, because I think coming out of Melee, and this is something that I think I wish I could have told myself, like, told younger me, there was this kind of, and I love Melee, and Melee is my favorite game, because I think the thing about Melee is when you're a new player, you really feel like the better players are better than you. Like, you play someone who's better than you, and you're just like, damn, this person's faster than me, they combo harder than me, they can do all these things that I can't do. And it's very daunting, but it's also very, if you're the right type of person, which I was, it's very inspiring. And I think when Brawl and these other fighting games, you know, that were kind of casual, more casual, came out, like Brawl being the best example, I think the assumption for a lot of people is like, oh, it's going to be so much harder to be consistent or to be dominant in these games because they just don't have that same barrier to entry. There's less stuff that you can specialize in. There's less comboing. There's less, like, advanced techniques. The best players aren't going to look that much better than the worst players. But the reality is there's a shitload of consistency when you actually look at who gets results. Like, he who shall not be named won 59 tournaments or whatever in a row when Smash 4 came out. You know, MKLeo is probably more dominant in Ultimate than anybody in Melee, like, has almost ever been. What is he doing? He's doing techniques that I can do, right? Like, there's nothing, you know, when I watch the best Spacey players, I'm like, these guys, their execution, their technical prowess is on a level that I would need to practice a lot to reach, right? Like, when I watch Zane, like the precision that he has with Marth, I'm just like, that's very impressive. When I watch J-Mook or Wizzy, their reaction, their consistent reaction tech chasing is crazy to me. When I watch MKLeo, I don't see him do techniques where I'm like, oh, I can't do that. You know what I mean? But I think in an interesting way, you know, I think that proves, and I hate to say it, I think that proves that Sakurai over the years did a really good job, because he found a way to simplify the game and you know, kind of remove these, what he saw as technical barriers of entry that make casual players feel like, hey, I can do it too. But on the flip side, I mean, the best players win all the time. Like, the best players are consistently better than the next tier down, and those players are consistently better than the next tier down. And like, if you've never, you know, if you're a Melee player and like you've never played those games and you've never lost to someone who's really good, it's kind of interesting, because you kind of think to yourself, you know, if you've only played Melee and you're only used to losing to people where they feel faster or flashier or more technical than you, it's an interesting change of pace. Coming back to the topic at hand, this is all to say that with Sakurai, with Melee, this is the kind of thing that makes me feel like, you know, he really added, it's true, he added so many mechanics to Melee, not just the advanced techniques, literally like spot dodges, side Bs were new to Melee, air dodges, well, DI was in, but, you know, types of DI besides SDI. Getting out of grabs, yeah, multiple different types of throws. Like, they added so much shield DI, wall jumps, wall techs. Wall techs were added. There were so many mechanics that, like, you could tell he just went ham. Like, from a... And Sakurai admitted the game was targeted towards hardcore gamers. He even said at the time that Melee was targeted squarely towards people who were well-versed in video games. Said Sakurai at the time. In particular, he initially wanted to appeal to hardcore gamers, but retroactively felt that he'd ruined the fun of the game. Dude, I wonder how this happened. I think it's more important to aim for the people who are at the bottom. The thing is, there's two ways to look at this, right? I think the first way to look at it is, and this is the way that I think us Melee players tend to look at it, is you can make a game that's very much dedicated towards top level players. You give them these tools, and that doesn't mean that the game doesn't have to be fun for casual gamers, right? Like, Melee was really fun as a casual. When I was a kid, Melee was super fun to play. The thing about Melee is, though, that like, that's only one way to do it. I feel like the other way to do it is incorporate low-level play into your game design choices, and people will rise to the top anyway. This is something we saw with Smash 4, something we saw with Ult. Again, even if you don't actually add all these, like, you know, really competitive mechanics or what have you, the people who are gonna get good are just gonna get good. Like, that's just gonna happen. And I think now that we've got the lens of being able to look back, you know, now that we have the power of hindsight, you know, I gotta say, I don't think necessarily that for what Sakurai's goals were, I mean, I understand where he was coming from. I wish he was a little more plugged into the competitive community. I wish we had that voice, because I think that things would have been, I think things would have shaken out differently, and I think we would have had, I don't know, maybe Brawl would have looked a lot more like PM or something like that. I do ultimately, you know, obviously fall on the side of just add cool competitive mechanics to your game, and like, people will, you know, if the game is good enough, people will play it at a casual level too. Like, that's just kind of, that's what happened with Melee. And that does just happen. The thing is, though, you know, I will say, you know, there's a lot of modern fighting games where I do feel like it is possible to scare people away, because I think that, like, you know, in the modern day, I look at some other fighting games and things like that that are coming out. Some games go a little too hard with like advertising their competitive mechanics or whatever. And I do think that when you make these sorts of, you know, hyper technical games, sometimes some people get scared away from that, right? Which is why you see, you know, even with platformers, like, look at a game like Celeste. Like, I feel like Celeste, they did a really good job, even though it's a very hard game and there's a lot of, like, obviously advanced maneuvering and advanced mechanics you can do. They have a lot of features to make it playable even for people who aren't good at video games.